Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting and giving me the opportunity to speak here to you. I do so as a German who is gratefully enjoying the hospitality of the Brazilian government to run a Brazilian office of Heinrich Böll Foundation, and nowadays it is not so self-understood that NGOs, both local or national and foreign, can work freely in their countries. There are processes going on in the world that tell us otherwise, so I'm really grateful for this. And I'm also speaking as a German that, as Mr. Ebert pointed out, has recently opted twice not to hold Olympic Games in Munich and in Hamburg. And what I will say will also draw from what our partners from Brazilian civil society organizations, as well as affected people, activists and scholars all around the world, have found out and stand for. Me personally, I do love sport. I do love high-level sports. I'm looking forward to the Olympics. I like especially the Olympic idea of the gathering of nations, of fairness, of competing on a basis of equality. Athletes preparing for years for this one moment, even if it lasts only 9.63 seconds. What I don't like is when organizing sports events, mega sports events, comes at a high cost for a community. Financial costs, or even worse, of human rights restrictions or even violations. The way sports mega events like World Cups and Olympic Games have developed into is something we urgently need to discuss. Because while they have grown, they have not brought about development. In fact, they might even hamper human sustainable development. What I'm going to say now is I'm taking the three pillars of the UN definition of sustainability. It's what you know it is economic, social and environmental sustainability. And in my remaining 8 minutes or so, I will point out to just some of the aspects that need to be mentioned. And it will not, I mean, this is the very concept of this conference, it will not be surprised that I will differ somehow from what Tanya Braga said, even though in some points I do agree. Okay, so look at the economics first briefly. These are not the most expensive Olympic Games. The World Cup was. The Olympic Games here in Rio are not, but they will cost more than 39 billion reais, according to official figures. In this calculation, though, hidden costs are left out, such as, for instance, the transfer of public estate to private corporations within the so-called public-private partnerships. That is true for the Porto Maravilha area and also for the building of the Olympic Park, which is 1.2 million square meters. Investments in public-private partnerships are not considered costs. Many of these contracts tend to put the commercial risk on the state, but leave the benefits, the profits, for the private corporation. We have a series of tax reductions, of tax exemptions for the international bodies, for the IOC, and also for the enterprises working for the Olympics. That has to be taken into account. And so these are just two examples, there are more. And summing up, at least two calculations partners of ours did, the ratio of public and private financing turns around. So if you sum it all up, you have that almost 60% are in fact covered by public money. Now, public money can be a good investment into the needs of the community and the country. It can also be money stripped off the public budgets and missing for providing essential state services. And I'm going to discuss this a bit in my following remarks. So second economic aspect would be growth and jobs. In 2010, two very prestigious institutions, the consulting firm Ernst & Young and the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, the Getúlio Vargas Foundation here in Rio, São Paulo, published a study that predicted that the World Cup would create an annual 3.6 million new jobs annual in Brazil, prompt 142 billion investment and attract additional 3 million tourists. I don't want to be rude, and I highly esteem the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, but that was nonsense. A series of studies have proven over the decades that structural economic benefits on BSP growth and on permanent jobs are next to nil with megaevents. Economic growth in Brazil was 0.1% at the end of 2014 and collapsed in the year after, as we all know. Positive effects on tourism are timid. Like expert John and Margaret Gold say, mega projects notoriously suffer heavy cost overruns, often fail to deliver the supposed benefits, and regularly provoke financial crisis. So on the macroeconomic aspect, public money spent on mega events is not very wisely spent. Third aspect, Barra da Tijuca. Barra da Tijuca, the western part of the city where most of the competitions will be held, has been envisaged as an Olympic center already for the 2004 bid. What we have seen in place, at least since the Pan American Games of 2007, is the concept of the city as a competitive company. Three objectives drove the 2016 Olympic project. The strengthening of existing dynamic centers in the southern zone, revitalization of decaying centers like the old port area, and the creation of a new center in Barra da Tijuca. Modernity and inclusiveness for a new elite without annoying slums, the core of a new Rio. That is the urban development philosophy of the biggest of the major property owners of this consortium. Carlos Carvalho was very clear about this in several interviews until he was silenced. Both Olympic projects, the Olympic Park and the Olympic Village, are connected with the construction of numerous luxury apartments, not social housing, but luxury apartments, unlike the 2012 Games in London, where the Olympic Park was designed to revive the crumbling East End with relatively low-cost housing. There are lessons learned from the London 2012 Games, you pointed out, especially the temporary structure, to avoid white elephants, but that lesson was not learned. Social, second one. I have to start with forced evictions. We don't have official figures. The Rio City Hall says officially that 22,000 families have been evicted between 2009 and 2015. That would be more or less 100,000 people. They say, though, that that was mostly due to them living in risk areas. The Federation of the People's World Cup Committees did research on their own, and they concluded that up to 250,000 people were affected or threatened by forced eviction throughout the country. Even if you say that this figure might be exaggerated, undeniably it is a serious social matter we're talking about. States have the right to take people out of their homes against their will, but they have to follow a series of binding rules. There are several, I just want to point out, they have to make them participate in the process, they have to inform them early enough for them to prepare, and most importantly, they have to compensate them adequately, and if ever possible, to provide housing very near the areas where they live, because it's not just houses, not just to contain the body, so to say, but it's a social surrounding, and it's for many people even the economic surrounding they depend on vitally for their economic survival. And if you take them 40 kilometers to the green areas at the periphery of the city, you don't provide this security. Mobility, very important, because central to the legacy discourse, and mega events today, they are not able anymore with this strong legacy discourse, and we just heard about it. It may sound surprising to you, but to my view, mobility in mega cities is also a social, even a human rights issue. The unequal and centralized structure of the metropolitan region here in Rio that provides service opportunities and work overwhelmingly in the city center and in the southern zone, making millions of people migrate every day, and that with a public transport system that is structurally underfunded and neglected and degraded, and say taken hostage by a consortium of private bus companies. And so you have a clear lack of political will, and thus a responsibility with the state for the fact that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of workers, men and women, have to spend 3, 4 or 5 hours every day to go to work and come back home. And everybody who has a cleaning woman or a housemaid knows about that. That is time they could and should use not only for taking care of their children, seeing to their education and supporting them, but also educating themselves or participating in social cultural life, whereas this daily upheaval certainly contributes to a diminished life expectancy. That is the social side of a discussion of urban mobility in a city like Rio de Janeiro. To make it short, the BRT, the special buses, they are an improvement for connecting the historically neglected huge western part of the city. So are the 60 new underground kilometers that have been built and add up substantially to the 41 kilometers we had been built in the last 39 years. But these are, so to say, collateral benefits, because they do not respond to an assessment of priority needs. The assessment definitely would have to prioritize the modernization and extension of the train system that links the center to the northern suburbs and the satellite municipalities in the Baixada Fluminense, which until today completely lacks any railway cross interfaces between them. The underground is the most sustainable means of transport. I know that it's expensive, but it is not without reason that most big European cities have clearly prioritized it. BRT is cheaper, but also a lot slower and much more dangerous. On the two lines that have been operating since 2014, more than 20 people have already been killed. More bold plans to expand the metro in Rio were cancelled, among them the project to link the cities of São Gonçalo and Niterói across the bay to the city of Rio, also all pendlers that come to Rio to work here every day. So I see a positive legacy here, but it could have been much bigger given the amount of money spent, and definitely more according to the priority needs. So last aspect of social, and then I will just point out rapidly to the ecological side, a democratic city. I cannot certainly discuss it here in detail, but the spatial inequality, the inequalities of space and living here in Rio, they are exacerbated, they have grown. The so-called pacified favelas are one example. The Porto Maravilha, the wonderful port area where we are here, is another one. Actually, the revitalization of the port area has really some wonderful aspects, and we are seeing some of them here. We have a space where pedestrians have regained their rights, something very rare to find in Rio de Janeiro. We have VLT here, which is a correct vehicle for such a space. But also, we have to see what we don't see. That is that social housing for the poor Afro-American population that lived here, around 40,000 in that area, and many of them had to leave. So social housing for them was part of the original plan, but has fallen short at least until today of being realized. Many of them, those people that have been removed, like those that have been removed along the BRT tracks or the Maracanã area, as I said, to remote areas 40 kilometers or so distant from the center. Rio has always had the peculiarity that a share of its poor people was living just next to their better off employers in the central part of the city, mixing the parts of the city socially. Now, Rio is moving towards the social spatial segregation that is so characteristic and typical for many large cities in societies marked by great inequality. The old center-periphery model, one condemned in all urban planning, worthy of the name, appears to be finally prevailing also in Rio. Okay, and last, the ecological, and we could discuss several issues here. I definitely appreciate the organizers' effort to provide organic food, not to use uncertified timber, and to use recycled gold for the metals. We could discuss whether reforesting trees or mangroves in a more monocultural plantation-like style may compensate for destroying a full functional biome, what happened at the Marapendi Natural Reserve with 20 hectares where the golf course was was built. It's not the same. It's not the same. That was an historic area of Mata Atlantica, which is a highly endangered biome. Okay, and then we, of course, we don't have only the golf course there, but also 23 apartments with 22 stories each. Again, apartments not meant for social housing. And this is really what big part of this Olympics here in Rio is about. So I want, in the end, you touched it briefly, I will touch it a little bit more, the Bay issue, because this is really remarkable. And as you know, probably because it has made international headlines, that when Rio delivered its candidacy for the game, they said they would clean the Bay, right? Then they said they will clean 80% of it until the beginning of the games. And now we know that we are really very far from it. Domestic sewage is the main problem, but industrial pollution is 15% and growing. The largest Bay recovery program over 12 years, providing $1.2 US, ended without achieving any significant results regarding environmental improvement. The 8 sewage treatment stations built through the program were made to treat 12,000 liters per second, but currently only are treating 6,000 liters. 51% of what was planned 2 decades ago. So still 18,000 liters per second go untreated into the Bay. And this has a lot to do with problems of different levels, because that was the state's responsibility to provide the connecting pipes, and they didn't. So you have sewage treatment stations, but you don't have pipes that connect them to the sewage systems of the municipalities. Actually, this, what you can call ecological catastrophe, is also linked to economic and social aspects of sustainability. You mentioned it already. No less than 624,000 homes around the Bay have no access to clean water, and 1.6 million don't have access to a sewage system. This is a major social problem. It is the poor who don't have access. It is also a clear sign of the lack of political will, because it has been a conscious decision of economic policy to make the Bay of Guanabara the base and the parking lot for the oil and gas industry here in the state, and for this huge pre-salt project that you certainly all know about, the oil and the gas in the deep sea. Unfortunately, pre-salt project, meaning fossil fuels, is an anchor element of the Brazilian development model. And a new petrochemical complex is on the way at the margins of the Bay. So given this scenario, and given the financial bankruptcy of the state of Rio de Janeiro, and given the fact that the lights will turn out after the end of the Olympic Games, I don't see any chance of the depollution of the Bay in the years to come. I really don't. So, summing up, the current model, and we are certainly going to discuss this during the day, the current model of mega events, and they are very different from the 72 Olympic Games. The current model is exhausted. It is in the full threefold sense of the term sustainability, socially, economically, and ecologically, not sustainable. Brazilians can be proud of themselves because they were the first people, the first nation ever to go out on the street, as they did in June 2013, and put 1 million fingers to this unhealthy and unsustainable stage that sport mega events have assumed. Thank you.